United States. One nuclear weapon.
On the global scene this week, President Muhammadu Buhari was at climate change conference in Poland, where he said no nation is strong enough to confront climate change. As such, she requires the cooperation of not just world leaders alone, but everyone. However, experts have commented on how things can be done to ensure that the world is made a better place for you and me. Just like the words of the song of late pop musical icon Michael Jackson. And on that note, I welcome you to another episode of the program Global Update, which promises to be interesting and quite insightful. Of course, other developments had their rounds as well. I am Patricia, Esami Lubba. Once again, welcome to the program. President Muhammadu Buhari has reiterated Nigeria's commitment towards constructively supporting multilateral actions aimed at addressing climate change so that a healthy environment can be restored for future generations.
Nigeria believes in joint and cooperative efforts to tackle the problem. We urge that efforts to address the challenges of climate change be pursued within multilateral frameworks. Concerted efforts should be made to strengthen sub-regional and regional organizations to serve as hubs for climate action and partnership.
Addressing world leaders at the United Nations Conference on Climate Change in Poland, the president, however, reiterated his call on the international community to support genuine efforts at saving Lake Chad from extinction and guaranteeing future security of the region.
We believe there should be clearly defined parameters for monitoring financial flows from developed countries to developing economies for climate change action. This should be underpinned by transparency and predictability. Similarly, we stress that a reliable mechanism must be created to augment sector contributions with funds from the private sector of countries whose economies are adding significant levels of greenhouse gases to the global atmosphere.
Professor Chukwumerije Okereke is an expert in the field of environment and development at the University of Reading in United Kingdom. He expounded more on climate change while brainstorming with the Federal Ministry of Science and Technology as well as the Ministry of Environment on capacity gap assessment for green economy transition in Africa and understand what green economy transition means. Here is an interview with Professor Okereke.
It just basically means ways through which Nigeria can increase its economic development or growth in a way that reduces waste or externalities on the environment. So for example, about 60 million Nigerians do not have access to modern electricity. And about 80% of Nigerians cook with three-piece traditional wood stove. This is a major blight on Nigerian economic growth and development. And what we are saying is that through green economy, it will be, for example, possible to increase energy access to the 60 million or so who do not have access to modern energy, but to do that in a way that does not impose burden on the environment, For example, through using renewable energy. Nigeria has made a lot of commitment, international commitment, that it wants to do stuff to tackle climate change. Nigeria has submitted what we call the nationally determined contribution, which is basically saying to the whole world, here are what I will do in order to make my economy more green, more climate resilient, and to stop polluting. I will reduce emission by 25% on my own, and if I get support from the international community, I will reduce 40%. And one of the key things Nigeria have said that it will do is to increase energy efficiency and get more of its energy from renewable sources. The problem, however, is that many of these commitments have been made without a deep understanding of the technical skills, the modern technologies that will be required to meet those lofty, ambitious targets. So what this workshop is doing is to try and work with the Ministry of Environment, but also in this case specifically with the Ministry of Science and Technology, to do an assessment of what are the capacity assets that we have in the ministry, but what more capacity do we need to acquire for the ministry to be able to play a central role in helping Nigeria to achieve this green economy transition.
Regards Nigeria's contribution to 25%, he said, steps have been taken to consider the rural people and will as such take within the reach of this rural setting.
The good thing about green economy is that also it has what we call the inclusive dimension, the social dimension. It's not just about growing the economy in a way that is environmentally sensitive. It's also about doing it in a way that's socially sensitive, and that means carrying the bottom billion, as we often say, along. Take another example of the energy access that I talked about. If we decide that we're going to try and increase the portfolio of renewable energy into our energy mix in this country, the people that will benefit the most will be the rural areas, because these are the areas where it's far more expensive to extend the national transmission lines to. These rural areas can then be supplying energy through what we call the distributed energy initiatives, for example, renewable energy. But also, even if you go down to the kitchen of your mom and my mom, these are women that suffer unprecedented amount of indoor air pollution because they are using traditional wood stove to cook. Green economy requires that we seek ways of changing that habit and that practices. For example, through improved clean cook stoves. This will reduce air pollution, but also eliminate the excessive amount of time that our women, our mothers and sisters spend trying to collect firewood, which also actually have a lot of impact on deforestation, which is in itself now exacerbating climate change across the country. So this is not a city-based project. It has a lot of implication for the rural people, for the poor people. If as a result of flooding or as a result of drought, we suffer massive failure, crop failure, these are also the people that will be hit the hardest. I think that governments sometimes are too focused on what's happening in the city and are not thinking imaginatively on how they can use the concept of green growth to lift the economic standard of the millions that are living in rural centers up and down the country.
Talking about agriculture, flooding and irrigation, so many things that have to do with yielding seeds or food for the country. What is the role of the rural people regards this target?
This is a good question. We first of all need to understand, as you indicated, what is Nigeria's position in context of climate change. And there are two big important points to emphasize. Number one, Nigeria is one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change in the whole world. One of the main areas in which climate change, or through which climate change will affect and is already beginning to affect Nigeria, is through drought. Now, drought is leading to loss of productivity, of agricultural yield in all manner of places of the length and breadth of Nigeria. Another way in which climate change is affecting Nigeria is through flooding. Many of us will know that 2010, 2011, 2012, Nigeria experienced unprecedented amount of flooding. This is not mere natural disaster, but has been caused, at least in large part, because of climate change. So Nigeria needs to be thinking hard and fast about how it can grow its economy, but in a way that makes it climate resilient. For example, in terms of agriculture, how can we mechanize our agriculture? How can we improve the seedlings that we plant so that they will be resilient to climate change? Remember that up to 84% of Nigerian agriculture is rain-fed, is subsistence. And this means that very little changes in rainfall or weather patterns have significant effect on productivity. But there is a second way through which climate change is significantly important to Nigeria, and that is economic growth. Already, the loss of agricultural productivity that I've talked about will have a massive impact on economic growth. This government, for example, is saying that boosting agricultural production is one of its primary objectives. And here we have climate change threatening that productivity. But there is another important way that I haven't heard a lot of our policymakers think or talk about, which perhaps is even more important. Up to 14 countries around the world have already announced that between 2030 and 2040, they will stop using fossil-fueled cars in their cities. This is a massive issue for Nigerian prospects in terms of exporting oil. We need to be thinking, who is going to buy our oil in the next 25 years? If there's now an oil glut, because we don't find people who are willing to buy our oil, that will mean that we will have a most unprecedented, unimaginable scale of economic disaster in this country. And so we need to be thinking, how do we transition our economy from the current fossil fuel-based economy to a much more greener economy? And that is a crucial point that I'm not hearing a lot of government officers talk about in this country.
What are the challenges mitigating against this? And what are we saying are the prospects?
That's a good question. There are several challenges. The first challenge has to do with vision. When there is a will, there is a way. I would like to see a high-powered team formulated by the president of this country to task them to come up with a vision of what does climate change mean for Nigeria and how can Nigeria best prepare itself to deal with climate change, but also even to make profit, because climate change offers some opportunities. So there is a lot of talk, but no clear vision. The second thing is what we call the political economy problem. Over 100 billion is spent worldwide in subsidy to fossil fuel energy, and just about 10 billion is spent on renewable energy subsidy. We need to change that because the incentive is important. One of the reasons why we don't have more people using gas in this country compared to kerosene is because of the perverse subsidy or incentive that is in place. So we need to change the incentive. But part of the problem in changing the incentive is what we call a political economic interest, for example, of some of the businesses that have been investing and making profit in oil. The other problem is lack of capacity, which is why we had this workshop. Green economy is a relatively new concept. Not many African countries, indeed not many countries around the world, have a good grip on the technical capacities that are required to make this transition. And Nigeria is really at the bottom of the ladder, if you like, in terms of acquiring, building, mobilizing, training the skill sets that will be required to make this transition. I give you a practical example. Nigeria is signing PPA agreement with China and other countries to upscale renewable energy use in this country. Have we trained the people that will standardize these solar panels, test them to ensure that they meet international standards? Have we trained people that will assemble the solar panels? Have we trained people that will be able to mount them? Have we trained people that will be able to service them and maybe even decommission them? This is what we're talking about, that you cannot just have a high, lofty plant somewhere without really thinking, do I have the skill set that is required to do this? You cannot import your way out of poverty. For a long time, we have sold oil and depended on oil. Even if you decide to make a transition to green growth without building the skill sets in this country, that will not be sustainable. So lack of capacity in our universities, in our vocational training centers is a big challenge to this transition. And there are a few more, but I think those are the top ones.
And so, how this can be done to assist government to provide softer results for Nigerians.
We talked also about the opportunity to use rainwater harvesting, for example, to increase the water availability in our rural and even urban centers, but also how we can use such rainwater harvesting skills to increase agricultural productivity. So water resources and the water ministry is a part of it, but also the same applies to transportation. One of the biggest ways through which Nigeria can contribute in reducing emissions and make its economy much more resilient is moving millions of cars away from the road by building, for example, intelligent monorail that can be powered through renewable energy. Ethiopia, for example, has the longest monorail or light rail project in Africa. A light rail project that is powered completely 100% by renewable energy. And so climate change also is an issue for the transportation ministry. And on I can go. It cuts across power, energy, transport, agriculture, water, resources, etc., etc. And that's why I have in the past called for Nigeria to set up a much stronger cross-cutting institutional arrangement that draws from these key ministries to be able to understand what is the impact of climate change on Nigeria and what are the specific initiatives that can be put in place to ensure that Nigeria makes this transition to green growth. This is a trend that is coming, and the fact that we are not seeing that train moving in our direction worries me, because many countries around the world are already thinking about how they will make the economy resilient to climate change up to 2050, 2080, 2070. And we have a vision 2020, and 2020 is just 2 years around the corner. And we should be thinking really about 2030, 2040, and 2050, and preparing to be able to make our economy climate resilient.
Having said a lot about taking advantage of climate change, looking at the business prospect of it, this, Professor Okereke says, opportunities abound for Nigerians, but there is the need to have the policy and the leadership right.
Trillions of dollars of clean energy finance out there. Also, given the teeming population of our country, people who do not have access to energy, is perhaps one of the biggest business opportunities now in this country. I would like to see entrepreneurs, people who are very enterprising, getting into the renewable energy business in this country. Nigeria recently launched a green climate change bond, and they've raised about 11 billion naira. We need to make sure that we invest that wisely to help to catalyze this renewable energy revolution I'm talking about. Climate change is a business opportunity in terms of the skill set, in terms of adaptation, in terms of mitigation. But it requires, again, the government to set up an intelligent policy landscape that will allow our business people to thrive in it. Take, for example, the huge business opportunity in changing the incandescent light bulbs that are used by various ministries in this FCT. That is a huge business opportunity. In India, in China, there has been huge profits made from renewable energy efficiency, but also the installation of renewable energies in factories and homes. China now is the world leading manufacturer of solar panels. Nigeria can establish a solar panel manufacturing plant that will supply the rest of Africa with the necessary PVCs and other solar technologies that they will need to also make the transition, because this is not only a Nigerian problem, this is also an African problem. At the moment, most African countries are just importing solar materials from China and Germany and elsewhere. This is, again, not sustainable. This is a huge business opportunity for Nigeria, but again, we need to get the policy and the leadership right.
From global commitments to multi-stakeholders action and inspiring implementation at the regional, national and sub-national levels, these are the issues engaging the attention of international, national and civil society advocates of migration in Marrakesh, Morocco, as they drumbeat support for the adoption of the Global Compact on Migration. Let's hear what our correspondent, Joy Osiagu, who was in Morocco, has to say about the deliberations so far.
It is a gathering of concerned member nations in Marrakesh to ensure an enabling environment for migrants and diaspora to contribute to sustainable development. What came out clearly from some of the thematic sessions is that for optimal contributions of migrants and diasporans, there must be trust between host countries and home governments. For many advocates, the Global Forum on Migration and Development is a crucial component that can make the process seamless.
It's a phenomenon. It has been up to now on the increase. There's an expectation that we'll see maybe even more people on the move. And therefore, what is a good thing is to try to manage that the best way we can collectively.
Most of these migrants, they contribute to the economic development of the host countries where they find themselves, or even the transit countries where they find themselves. So it is very important that we treat migrants with dignity and we uphold and respect the human rights of these migrants.
Now, how is the African continent handling this?
Well, if you can see, there is quite a very good representation of African countries in this forum, and most of the migration that even takes place, about 80% of the migration that takes place within the African continent, it is intra. It is actually within these African countries that people move, and because of the treaties and conventions that allows for free movement of people. So we're trying to link this migration to development, and that is why it says unlocking all the potentials of all migrants for development.
We've attended several fora on this same issue. Can we hear you talk a bit about the political will coming from Nigeria, especially from the government of President Muhammadu Buhari as it concerns migrants, internally displaced persons?
Well, the government of President Muhammadu Buhari is very much committed to the protection and assistance of displaced people, including migrants themselves who found themselves in other parts of the country. The government has mandated or created a committee early this year to go and talk with the government of Libya to start the immediate evacuation of our stranded nationals that found themselves in Libya. So the government is very committed, and as you are also aware, there are different government agencies that handle issues of migration, and we have a national migration policy on how to look at these issues critically and have a whole of government and whole of society approach in addressing the issue of migration, especially the irregular migrants. The government, through the National Commission for Refugees, Migrants and Internally Displaced Persons, has carried out a sensitization workshop to educate the people on the ills and dangers of irregular migration, going through the irregular routes to migrate. And so the government has the political will and is doing its best. Also on the area of internally displaced persons, the government is doing very well to support these people to bring succor to the IDPs in the country.
There are challenges and complexities that may require some tactical strategies to ensure effective implementation.
Since the Global Compact on Migration is not binding, how are we now sure? How are the lawyers going to enforce its implementation? The discussions we have had so far has made us understand that adopting best practices will be the best way.
as in case of priority issues. We want to see issues of human rights of migrants be on the table. We want to see issues of international cooperation between countries and also international organizations to be on the table. We want to blur the gap that are existing already between destination and the origin countries in such a way that migrants are used as a bait either for the protection of a country or for the advancement of the self-interest of countries. So we want to see more of a solidarity movement between countries and individuals as well as actors to see that this works for migrants and also work for countries.
There are success stories from countries like Germany, which is returning to migration positives, and Senegal, which has created opportunities for positive diasporan representation in its parliament. Participants believe it is possible to change the narratives, calling for the rejection of the demonization and criminalization of migration, even as they look forward to the adoption of the Global Compact on Migration.
Over the years, the bilateral relation between Nigeria and the United Arab Emirates, UAE, has continued to increase, especially in trade, as the nation celebrated its 47th National Day in Abuja. Diplomats and government top functionaries from the two largest oil producers of their continent applaud the constant increase in the trade value. Minister of State for Foreign Affairs Hadija Abba Bukar Ibrahim said Nigerian government will continue to create robust and enabling environment for all investors.
Ratification of the Investment Promotion and Protection Agreement, IPPA, and the Double Taxation Avoidance Agreement, DTAA, on the part of Nigeria should emphasize the opportunity for our two nations to maximize the economic opportunities afforded by our collaboration.
The ambassador of the United Arab Emirates and that of Nigeria are on the same page, especially in the fight against corruption, which was boosted recently when President Muhammadu Buhari signed 9 agreements on recovery of stolen funds.
The UAE has and will always provide full transparency on all the requests that is tabled by the relative agencies here in Nigeria, and we have had excellent relations. Just 4 moments ago I was with His Excellency Ibrahim Magu, the EFCC acting chairman, and he was just last week in Dubai, and we are sharing the information to the acceptable level that is required from the authorities here in Nigeria.
The occasion offered guests the opportunity to exchange ideas and network. This is how it's been for this week. Hope to have you again for another episode of the program Global Update. I remain Patricia, Esami, Lubba saying bye for now.
Constitution of the United States.